Welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Spelman, and I am an agronomy educator with Penn State Extension. And as always, I am joined here with my lovely co-host and colleague, Justin Brackenridge. Justin, how are you doing today?
We're doing good, Ryan. A little chilly this morning. I had 26 at my house, so it might be fall or it might be almost winter. But either way, we're happy to be getting a little cold. We've been running corn pretty good over here right now, so things are looking up. How about where you're at?
Things are going well here as well. We haven't quite gotten into the 20s, but we've certainly had a few nights in the mid to low 30s, and we're starting to get frost most mornings. But Justin, you are forgetting about our second summer that might come. So nowadays, it seems like we always get a second wind here before it actually gets cold.
So it's actually today is October 28th, and tomorrow as most of you probably know, I'm just a little south of Pittsburgh, but tomorrow they are forecasting us to be at 20 degrees above average and a near record high of almost 80 degrees. So this morning we were 26, 27. Tomorrow we're supposed to be by Thursday almost 80. So yeah, this is sixth season for everyone, right? Ups and downs all day, but what we're here for and what we're really excited about is we're going to talk about farm succession, farm transition planning. This is something that we get a lot of questions about when Ryan and I are doing our pesticide meetings, when we're doing forage meetings, soil health meetings. I mean, it's just something that comes up a lot. A lot of our producers are interested in this. We had some of our listeners reach out, some of our other colleagues saying like, hey, you guys really need to get on this topic. And we'll admit it's outside of our realm of what we know a lot about. But Ryan, what do you think? I mean, it's a big deal. How much are you kind of seeing this happening where you're at?
Yeah, I mean it's a huge deal, and like you were kind of talking before we jumped on, it seems like in a lot of families we have a first of all an aging farming population, and either you have someone to pass the farm along to, maybe it's multiple kids, or maybe it's no one, right? It's kind of all across the board. But we are in a kind of a time where I'm seeing a lot of farms in that transition process or looking somehow to succeed the farm, find someone to take it over, whether they have someone lined up. But again, this is not a topic that I am super familiar with. It's a little bit outside of our expertise, and I think we've had a lot of episodes like that lately, which has been great. I think anytime we get to talk to people who really know what they're talking about in subjects we have no idea what we're talking about in, it goes a lot better because we're curious about it and we aren't afraid to ask those dumb questions. And maybe before we bring our guests on, Justin, I think you pulled up a few statistics specifically about Pennsylvania farms that might be
Yeah,
able to highlight the situation.
yeah, I did. So like I kind of got into this and thought maybe why is this a problem? Why are we hearing about this more? And so I kind of did dig in a little bit, and the U.S. retirement age, as we could probably imagine from an average, is 65, right? That probably doesn't shock many of us if we're in like when we're Ryan and I are in government jobs and other people. So that probably checks out. But the average U.S. farmer is 58.1 years old. And so like they're really very close to this U.S. average retirement. Uh, I tried to find the statistic of how many farmers actually have a saved retirement, and that wasn't something I could find, but I bet it is shockingly low, right? And so then that kind of brings in this question of, well, they're creeping up to what this retirement could be. What is their option for retirement if they don't have a way to pay their bills or a way to actually quote unquote retire? The other really interesting thing kind of goes back to what you mentioned of if we have a bunch of people interested in the farm, how do we kind of divvy that up to support all of these different mouths or all of these different endeavors? The average Pennsylvania farm is 139 acres, right? And so once we start like boiling that down and splitting it up, that's going to make that even more challenging. And a lot of our producers, a lot of folks I work with specifically are renting their ground. And so like that might skew this data a little bit, but that changes this farm successionary planning scheme some a little because we're not talking about the ground you rent. We're talking about what you own. And you can lose rented ground at any point in time, and that can change the whole landscape of your farm. And so like it's just really interesting to me of where we see this going in the next couple years and how we get the help to do this, right? It feels like almost an insurmountable task and something that we're really excited to have some experts on and gonna kind of sift through this with us today. Tell us the good stuff about it, the bad stuff about it, where you get started. I think you're going to hear some very familiar topics that we've talked about with like grain marketing or other things about record keeping, right? Everybody's favorite thing to do is keep track of your record, keep track of your taxes. But we're also going to talk about what resources are available. This can be kind of specific to Pennsylvania, but also on kind of the United States scale, because a lot of these things are not just specific. And we're really hopeful that this is a good day for all of us to learn something and take something away very useful to our transitions.
Yeah, certainly. And I think as we dive into this topic, one thing that I'm interested to really hear about is when we're talking about a farm business, it's really such a unique business where personal finance and business finance are so intertwined. So this succession process, I'm sure, can get very messy. And sometimes folks are farming to support the farming and then supporting just the maintenance of their family and the home that is on the farm. So how do we go from that to succeeding that and divvying it up, like you said? And I think it's time to learn.
Let's do
So
it. Bring them in.
let's do it. All right. So we have two experts in this, and we have Joy Kirkpatrick from University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we have Darlene Livingston from PA FarmLink. So Joy, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Ryan. So I work in Wisconsin with, so it's the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm a part of the Division of Extension. So I started out as a county educator in the southwest part of the state, and then in 2004, I had the opportunity to take the statewide position that focused a bit more on succession planning. And I total years in extension is 31. So I have been doing this for quite a while and farm succession specifically for about 20 years, I guess. Yeah. And so yeah, I do educational programs. I do a lot of webinars. I do in-person conferences and workshops, and then also work with farms one-on-one when we have that opportunity.
That is an impressive amount of time with extension, and we love to hear it. Well, someday we hope to be in that place as well. But it's great that you have that background, that real tie to agriculture, as well as the succession planning side. I mean, having that foundation in agriculture and extension is really important to understanding the unique needs in these situations, I'm sure. All
Yeah,
right,
it's
so yeah.
yeah. I was just gonna say it, having um having grown up on a farm, and then all of my work since then has been with some sort of agriculture. I mean, I have to admit, I started out my master's degrees in dairy nutrition, so I was feeding cows and taking a lot of rumen samples. But as I got into extension, I realized that this was a need. So that I had the opportunity and luxury of being able to sort of design that.
Well, as agronomists, we'll not hold dairy nutrition against you, but
Right.
that's all right.
Especially when you start out in Wisconsin. I mean, it is the dairy state. So,
Right, right.
all right. Well, next we'll introduce here Darlene Livingston. She is with Pennsylvania FarmLink. Darlene, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Ryan. Yes, I started with PA FarmLink about 15 years ago, and my history before that, I have lived and worked on our family farm with 3 generations of my family over the years, and we are currently the 4th generation on our farm. And so I've had a lot of experiences with a lot of different generations and the challenges that can come along with that. And when I started FarmLink, with FarmLink, what I found was we had beginning farmers looking for opportunities, but without the succession planning for the farm, we lessen the opportunities for those beginning farmers as well. So it really shows the importance of succession planning and transitioning the farms to the next generation. And it definitely is a passion of mine to work with farmers in that on that scale and in that realm, and just have worked with many on individual basis, but also do programming and workshops and webinars across Pennsylvania and things like that as well.
Sure. Well, I'm sure that also having that lived experience of having a generational farm and seeing that farm transition succession process must just inform your role so much more and connect you to that, I'm sure.
I like to say that we did it wrong, but we did it. So, we've made many mistakes along the way, but hopefully we learn from them. And we have not done anything perfectly, but we have continued to move through things and carry on. So I think there's a lot to be said for that too. I don't think there's a lot of perfection around the topic. There's many ways to go about things. So.
Sure, and making those mistakes probably informs your education so much better. It's important, right? That we can learn from those and pass it on. So, Darlene, now for our Pennsylvania audience, can you talk a little bit about what PA FarmLink is and kind of how it connects to them?
Sure. PA FarmLink is a nonprofit organization, and we have three different areas of work. The one area is farm succession planning, and so on. We do a lot of work in that area, and then we also have a land linking database of entering farmers as well as lands available to farmers, and we seek to link the two together. And then we have a wide range of resources and a learning academy on our website. So we have found it important to have resources available to farmers 24/7 when they have the time to look at them and to utilize them and so on. So we find ourselves working in those three areas most of all.
And we'll make sure that we get a link to PA Farm Link put in the meeting notes. It's a really nice website that you were talking about connecting to farmers. There's a drop down to where you can have this land linking database that people can get in there and look at farms or register farms and stuff. So we'll make sure that that resource is available for anyone that's interested in checking out PA Farm Link to a little bit more detail. So I want to jump right into this, right? We've done some introduction, we've done some discussion. My first question is there a difference between successionary planning and transition planning? I hear both of these terms thrown around when I go to meetings. What's the difference here? Is this the same thing?
I think they are used, those words are used interchangeably. I do like to draw a tad bit of a distinction between the two of them. I think that transition planning is more, in my mind, about the tangible assets, right? The land, um, the machinery, the livestock, those kinds of things. So like the things that you can like physically transition and you're using. When I talk about, and that can happen within and that can happen as the business continues. It could happen at an estate planning point, right? Like after the owners have passed away. So I think that's the way I look at the phrase transition planning. When I talk about succession planning, I wrap in also the idea that there is management that needs to be transferred, that decision-making piece needs to be developed, and that it's an actual business that's going to still be running, because transitioning, that can mean that it gets divvied up to a lot of different people, or it could mean that it goes all together. But succession planning, I think, is a bit more specific to the business continuing in some sort of fashion, and making sure that you have those conversations about, I think there's that institutional knowledge of a farm that needs to be transferred to that next generation. And so I think succession planning is a little more encompassing when you're trying to actually transition management along with those assets. Darlene, would you agree?
I would agree with Joy, and I will fully admit that sometimes I probably switch the two more often than
I
I
still
should.
do.
But I think that Joy has a very solid description there and a very solid um, process of that. I totally agree with her.
You know, unfortunately, I think we pick up bad habits depending on who writes the paper we're reading, right? Like, and so if they're synonymous to the person reading the paper, then they become synonymous to us. And then you read someone else's, and someone else has now kind of taken Joy's approach of maybe a different delineation between them. And now I'm like, well, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. Now we're using two different terms. So I think that was a great one for me to kind of clean up. Joy, I want to jump back to you. Before we started this, you were talking about the three buckets and the way you kind of describe successionary planning. And maybe you and Darlene have done this before, but would you mind to step us through that process and what that kind of looks like,
Yeah.
you and describing to folks?
Sure. So with a lot of the farms that I work with, and you guys are an extension too, they can choose to work with us, right? So the ones that choose to work with us, I find um, a big part of the conversation and maybe a bit of the challenge is looking at all of these business assets, right? All of these farm assets that are a part of this business. And then when you're trying, maybe you have a successor that's already working with you and you're trying to figure out how do you transition? And this goes back to more of the asset piece, right? This is how do you transition those assets in a way that hits all of the financial goals that you've got. So you've got an owner generation, and a long time ago, I just started calling them owners instead of the older generation. It's because got a little pushback on that. So we got the owner generation and the successor generation. That's the way I describe them when I write and talk about them. But so the owner generation, we probably know a lot of these kinds of farmers where any profits that they have, they put right back into improving and maintaining the farm, which, in this day and age, that's a big part of where your money has to go. You have to keep improving, building so that your farm is at a place where you want it to be. So it's attractive to that next generation as well, which means they might not set aside specific cash or funds for their separate retirement plans, right? I have had farmers talk about, the farm is my retirement plan, right? That those assets are it. So you've got that concern. And the other thing that we know about farmers is they're excellent tax managers. So if they don't have to pay taxes, that's a perfect year for them, for a lot of people. But that also means they're not paying in a lot into Social Security. So that means that when it does come for them to start taking Social Security, it may not be at a level for that monthly payment that someone like myself or you guys, like you have a wage that it gets taken out, right? And it's consistent. And so those two things mean that that owner generation may be way more dependent on those business assets for their retirement than maybe other people who have other types of retirement pieces that they can bring into it. So that's one bucket.
1 second. When you say the farm assets are their retirement, is that a position of like liquidation at retirement age? Is that what they're kind of thinking with that?
No, it can be a lot of different ways,
Okay.
right? You can think of, like, if they don't have anybody that wants to take it over with their family, maybe they are gonna sell it outside of the family. But those business assets can become an income stream for them in a lot of different ways. They could sell it, they could still own some of it and still be a part of the business, right? Maybe it's rental income that they get from the business. Maybe they're selling it slowly over time to that next generation. So they've got a land contract payment or something like that. So there's lots of ways that can still be their income. And it doesn't always have to be, they just sell it all at once. That's a good question. So So we've got that one bucket, that's that retirement. And I always joke that, retirement's a 4-letter word to farmers, right? So sometimes they say, well, shifting gears to your later farming years is, we'll call it that. And then that next bucket, that second bucket, is that if you do have a successor that's interested or maybe even been a part of the farm for several years, you've kind of made maybe a promise that, or some sort of maybe even unspoken idea that those assets are going to be in place in some sort of way for that next generation to be able to farm. So you're looking at those assets being income stream of some sort for that next generation. And if that's just to like pay for just those farming, we in Wisconsin, at least, a lot of farms are having to have off-farm income, right? So that can help with it. But the second bucket is those business assets there for that next generation, if that's the plan. And then depending on the size of your family, that successor may not be related to you. So we also have this third bucket a lot of times that we have to talk about, and that's the inheritance assets. So whether your successor is related to you or not, you might have children who you want to in some way provide some sort of inheritance. I'm very careful about saying that those off-farm children have an expectation of inheritance, because maybe we need to tamper down some expectations, right, with the size of the farm and what that owner generation's goals are. We always want to go back and say, what does the owner generation want that end result to be, right? And if it's not an exact even distribution, that's okay. They just need to be able to explain that and have that conversation. So we're always talking about these three buckets. You've got the retirement assets, the business assets need to stay in place, and then there's a conversation a lot of times for those inheritance assets. And I hear a lot of times, well, we've already got the successor on the farm and they're getting an income from the farm. We're getting an income from the farm. So really, we just kind of need to move the way the income comes to us in different ways, and we'll be fine, right? We're making it now. I think a key thing that we have to consider is a lot of times a farmer will say, well, I'll just live off of the rental income that maybe my child or the successor can pay me rent for the land that I have. But when you actually put that down on paper, they may not have been like realizing that kind of income for themselves before, right? They've just been living off of what the farm can provide, or maybe they've been living off of an off-farm job or something like that. So a lot of times when you put that cost of paying rent to the owner generation, it really messes up the cash flow, because they've not been paying themselves rent prior to that, right? They've not been realizing that return on that asset like they would when they start asking for rental payments. So really having a good idea of what the cash flow is now, and putting those kinds, either a land contract payment where you're paying interest on it, or the rental payments, you really have to do that. You can't just say, oh, it's all working now, so we just shift around the income streams and it'll be fine. And there's a little finer point that you have to put on that.
Right, just because it's working now doesn't mean when you start to separate these things into the three buckets, right? We have our retirement, business assets, inheritance assets. Is it going to work once you do that? And to really, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying here is it takes that legwork of putting pen to paper and then being a good communicator about it is
Yes.
kind of what I'm hearing, at least to start this, right? So I guess now I want to kind of connect this to what's going on in Pennsylvania right now. So Darlene, this is going to be a question for you. It seems that from what we were talking about earlier, me and Justin, that we have this aging population, I guess aging, maybe this owning population, right? And looking towards the succeeding generation in Pennsylvania. Is this a new topic in Pennsylvania? We hear a lot about this, right? And is this a new topic? Is it a really popular topic in Pennsylvania right now? Is there buzz around it? What do you think? Is this popular?
Honestly, it's not a new topic, but I think we have brought more visualization to it. I think there has been more conversation on the whole subject matter over the years. I like to say that I think each generation probably has done possibly the best they knew how to do, but as we advance in what we know and the resources and the people we have working on this topic, the more planning we know that we need to do, the more work we need to do. And I think the further advanced that we have become in our work with succession planning and encouraging farmers to plan. Obviously, as you can tell from the age of the farmers, there's still a lot of work left to do. But it's definitely a topic that it has gained momentum. It has gained a lot of momentum because Pennsylvania is is the state with the largest number of beginning farmers. So that has actually brought more conversation to the forefront. There's other things that have played a role in it too, such as I'll just sprinkle in here like the whole Medicaid asset issue. If somebody needs long-term care and many other things, Joy is totally correct in the fact that we have to look at the financials and start there with this succession planning, and that sometimes is tough. So it's not a new topic. It is getting probably more momentum now, because people are bringing it to the forefront. People like yourselves are bringing it to the forefront, and farmers are learning that they really do need to plan, that it's not, in my mind, a good thing to just leave it in a will for someone, and have it be part of the estate plan, because that doesn't transfer the business. As Joy had mentioned, the transfer of the actual business and the management being the whole succession piece. We don't do that as well if it's transferred in a will. That's part of an estate plan. So it is going about it a bit differently, bringing it more to the forefront and hopefully continuing to increase the knowledge and the need to show the need for that.
I think that is maybe the most visually or descriptive way that I've heard this described that really helped me kind of rationalize this is that you said this is different than putting it in a will because the succession plan is transferring the management, right? And we think about it's I don't know, for whatever reason, it was just like this epiphany for me that all of this kind of clicked and made sense as to why it mattered. Is that every day we transition properties or we transition assets and tractors and things like that through a will, but every day we work with people that say, I just inherited this stuff and now I don't know what to do with it, right? Like that is the piece that we are missing that this successionary planning is helping us with, right? Like, is that too fine a point or is that the goal here?
No, I think you're right about that. I think the success of the farm succession plan has to do with transferring that management and doing it actually through the succession planning rather than leaving it in the estate. I think there's a much higher degree to success in my mind because you're pairing those people for that management. You're transitioning that management. And the decision making, hopefully they're working with the next generation. I think it's smoother overall. And I think everyone involved, whether it's other family members who aren't on the farm or anyone else, I think it becomes a much more smoother process because there's been more communication. There's been transfer of some of the management skills, as well as you have to keep in mind too that you're much more likely to be transferring or moving that viable business when you do it while they're still alive and well, because as we well know, if you think about another type of business, most of those are transferred prior to someone's passing. I want to say, in the business world, they don't wait till someone has passed away to transfer that active business. So,
And I wrote down here in my note that the successionary plan is preparing them for management, not just ownership.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what I will take away from this. And maybe that's too simplifying for what we're talking about, but I think that will help me and maybe help some of the conversations. In extension, we look for simplification, right? We look for transferring a message. And I think that's a wonderful moment or something that's helped me kind of wrap around this well. So thank you.
Yeah, I think to add on to what Darlene said, she reminded me, like, we do need a really solid plan on how to transfer that management. And couple of things that make it a little bit different for farms compared to, like Darlene said, and she's right. Like, you see businesses transferring while everybody's still alive. I think for farms, the family home is also a big part of a lot of times those assets. And so it's hard for that owner generation to think about moving away from their home. And then the other piece that goes back to that taxes, they just don't want to have to pay any taxes. And sometimes they see that, the whole idea of, like, if you hold on to it, especially land, and you get that step up in basis after the owners pass away, um, then you've won the game, right? You haven't paid any taxes because if that next generation doesn't have to pay any taxes, if they sell it while they're still alive, there might be some taxes that need to be paid. So we have to kind of, I think another message is taxes done well. Like, nobody wants to pay more than they have to, right? But you also have to think about, is that sort of um hobbling your plan so that that next generation has the ability to do what they need to do to continue the business. So kind of separating that end all be all of not paying taxes with those other goals of that farm continuing is a big conversation. I just had that conversation with a farm couple last week that he was really struggling, that he was maybe going to have to pay some taxes because his son was buying the last little bit of the farmland. But that also means that you're making money.
And I guess I would just add too, there isn't a perfect solution for all farms. They wouldn't be the same perfect solution. So while I said that too, obviously you would want to work with all your professionals, your expert professionals to make the right decision for your farm. So, there's not one easy answer out there, and that's one of the complexities and probably why the topic is a little bit more daunting to farmers and why it's easy to put it off and so on, because there's so many variables in it.
Right. I think that I think about it the way a lot of times farmers work with professionals. And I'm separating at this point. Like, for you guys, right? You're agronomists. You work in agronomy, and you can give the same recommendation a lot of times for a wide span of farms if they're dealing with the same sort of pest, or like, there's a little more standardization about what you can recommend. Just the fact that you have 7 kids instead of 4 kids makes the farm transition and succession planning a little bit more complex, and there's lots of human emotions that come along with that succession planning. So it makes it, to be quite honest, it makes it a lot of fun to work with for me, because you get to kind of be a part of those conversations. But it's also, they really would, a lot of farms would like to go to the attorney and say, tell me what to do. And the attorney's going to be like, well, what's the end results, or what is it that you want to have happen? And if those farms haven't had that conversation, and that can be a more of a struggle than you think, right? Like, talking about the death of the owners, talking about siblings possibly working together, can be very challenging conversations. And they a lot of times would rather say, well, this is what the attorney said we were supposed to do, so let's just do this. And then it puts this sort of like mask over some of those things that really need to be talked about.
Sure, and this is probably a good segue here to talking about the role of an attorney in a succession plan. So, can you maybe define what's the role of an attorney here? When should you get one involved, and what their purview should be, and what maybe you need to come prepared to talk to an attorney about?
Yeah, I'm going to give an attorney answer, even though I'm not an attorney. It depends. It depends.
That's an extension answer as well, so you're in luck.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think some attorneys are like well versed in that whole conflict management, succession planning, the management part of it. So you might find an attorney that is happy to help you from the very beginning. I think a lot of attorneys would prefer to have farms to have had some of those conversations, to maybe have set some goals, maybe had done some visioning about like, this is a timeline of when we'd like to be out of this, further out from making all the decisions or owning all of the assets, right? So I think having some of those kinds of conversations ahead of time can be really important, so that you are not having them in front of the attorney. Depending on, the attorney may not be super happy about it, and you might be spending a lot of money to have these conversations in front of an attorney when you can have them someplace else with someone maybe that either isn't as expensive or maybe is able to help you without charging. So they think that knowing what you want to do, and then having all of those sorts of details of if you've got balance sheets and income statements, so that they understand the and then also if along like having a list of all of your assets, and they would love it if you had a list of their assets of what the market value is now and what you paid for them, or what your original basis was in that, because they're the attorney and your accountant are going to help you with the implications of taxes, right? If you sell it, if you transfer it at death, all of those sorts of things. So if you have a really good list of what you own and the values, I think those two things are really important. And then also like a list of your beneficiaries, your heirs, their dates of birth, all of those sorts of things, can having those in organized in a way that they can look at them and help you a little bit better, because they can help you put those things together, but you could be doing a lot of those on your own and being better prepared.
So I think, Darlene, I'd like to come at you with this question. We talked a little bit about this document, Cultivating Your Farm's Future. And it sounds like before or during this part with this lawyer or the attorney or where we're at, the biggest thing is to become prepared with our records, our assets, all of these things. And this document can really help us kind of start this process of getting things in order. Is that right? Or is there somewhere else, or where should we start before we go to the attorney?
Sure, that's correct. The Cultivating Your Farm's Future has many worksheets in it to work through a lot of these things. It was originally created by Joy and her staff there at University of Wisconsin, and they have it available. We also have it for Pennsylvania now, and it's great because it works through a lot of those things that she just mentioned and others too, that you can bring that information in an organized fashion to your attorney, to other ag professionals, and so those resources are very beneficial. And that is a good starting point. I also, if you need someone to help you with the conversations, then I would suggest you look for a facilitator for the farm family meetings and that sort of thing. It's great to have them on your own as a farm family, but if you struggle with that, there certainly are facilitators. FarmLink has facilitators. Other organizations out there, other ag professionals are trained to facilitate conversations with you that can either help you just begin the conversations with your family, work through the worksheets and the workbook and so on, and that type of thing to better prepare yourself for meeting with an attorney or other ag professional. And I would also suggest that when you're looking for those people, you make sure that they have uh, solid agriculture background and knowledge. And is also a worksheet in that workbook that really addresses how to interview people, questions to ask them, and so on, because there is a large difference between an attorney that has ag knowledge and someone who doesn't and is qualified. I will give this example that when I was working with my siblings, we had an agreement that my father wanted us to show to the attorney. And when we did, it come back with a balloon payment at the end. And I said to my siblings, if this is what you want, that's fine. I'm still love you dearly, but I'm going to walk away from it. None of us could figure out where the balloon payment came from. The attorney took it on himself, he didn't understand agriculture and farm families, that they could give up some value, and he put it in there himself, and we literally ignored his advice and went and did our own thing. But that gives you an example of what can happen when someone does not understand agriculture and the people involved in the, the family and so on, because it can look very different than what someone's used to if they haven't been in that realm. So I think it's very important too to look at the professionals you're working with as well. But that document also, like I said, helps you with that too.
So I'm kind of scrolling through this document, and it is very comprehensive. And one of the things that I think that I appreciate the most about it is asking questions you would never ask yourself. Right. And I think so many times when we generate lists or we make our own documents, or regardless, even if we're thinking about trying to plan just our tasks for the day, right, we forget about all the other things that we might come up. And this one, you're thinking, oh, I don't know, I didn't think about that one, but that's a really great question. And it's all laid out there very specifically in a very nice order for you, that is going to force you to maybe make some hard choices, or be forced to look at some hard truths that we don't necessarily want to look at. When would you suggest starting to think about something like this? I'm sure it depends, or I'm sure the sooner the better, right? But if you're thinking about this process, like, is this years before? Any advice on when someone should be doing this?
Well, it'd be okay. So I'm going to tell you my ideal answer, and then I'll tell you what usually happens. How about that?
That sounds great.
Yeah. So ideally, I would love for the owner generation to be thinking about succession planning even before like their kids are out of high school, right? Because giving some sort of parameters of like what's it going to take to come back to the farm, thinking about like we encourage people to be like work off the farm or do something different for a period of time, even if that's just like a couple of years, so that that successor, that child gets in some experience someplace else, right? That their parents aren't have always been their bosses. They've had experience of having a different boss, um, so that they have just at least at that very bit. So like if you could say, look, I know that you really want to come back to the farm, or all four of you want to come back to the farm, but here are some requirements. And so making it early enough in the game that you're not changing the parameters. You've got one child that's coming in and been there for 5 years, and then you tell the others they like, well, you have to do this when that first one didn't have those rules. That's a little hard, and it happens, right? But the ideal would be, do they need to get a degree? Do they need to have off-farm employment experience? Do they need to come back with a plan as to how they're going to what they're going to add to the farm, right? Are they going to replace some labor that you're paying for outside, like out of non-family labor? Are they going to replace the labor? Are they going to use some assets that maybe aren't being used to their potential and have a new enterprise that's going to be their thing? Like what are the requirements for them to come back and be a part of eventually be a part of the management and ownership of this business.
And
So
and
I
this is
think
not a static document, right? Like,
no,
life is not static, life is not
no,
perfect. What is happening today may
right,
not be the plan 5 years or 6 months from now, right? And so
right.
I assume that this is not like a fill it all out, sit at the kitchen table, and
Mm-mm.
then we just put it on the shelf, and then that's where it sits, right? And then one
Right.
day we pull it out.
Right. I feel like that workbook, especially, here's the way I describe it for people when they ask about it or I'm talking about it is I don't think that it's something that you start on page 1 and you fill it out to like page 66 and you have a plan. That is not going to happen. It is not going to give you a plan that way. The way I look at it is every single one of those worksheets could maybe help you start a really good conversation about a component that you need to have discussed, and maybe write down some summary of what the discussion was from that worksheet. So what I'd say is you might not need every worksheet. Your farm might not need to answer every worksheet, but I suggest as people flip through it and be like, oh yeah, this is something that we haven't talked about and it's kind of fits our situation right now. So maybe use that worksheet to have that conversation. Maybe write, like I said, write some summary notes from that conversation. So then you're kind of piecing your plan, at least what you want to have happen. The idea is that you've had these conversations, have a better idea of what you want to have happen, so then you can go to your professionals like your accountant and your attorney and say, we've had these conversations and this is what we'd like to do. And then they're going to help you and be in a better position to help you get to where you want to go because they understand what direction you're heading as well. So it's all about, and it's set up in a way that it's where are you now, where do you want to be, and how do you get there. So those are the 3 sections of the workbook. So maybe that where are you now is the first place, that first section. Because when you look at a 66-page workbook that has a lot of blanks in it, it can be pretty overwhelming. And we'd really like you to just take it a little bits at a time. And like that where are you now section might be the first place to start.
My favorite sections are the how retired will you be? I can just, I'm running through just even thinking about my dad or all of the farmers that I know, and this hard conversation, and then pulling out this paper and said, do you remember when
Yeah.
you told me you weren't going to do this between December and March? Here we stand, right? I can just envision how terrible these conversations would go trying to get people to commit to how retired you're going to be. But
Yeah.
I think those are really great points and things that have to be thought about
Right.
as you transition management and who's the operator and who's making the financial and day-to-day type decisions.
Yeah, yes, the management decisions, right? Maybe they want to. I always there was a farmer who something we talked about retirement planning. He goes, I want to do like how is it? I want to do what I want and what I like, but only when I want to do it, right? Like, so like there's this flexibility, like everybody wants to rake hay. So like okay, then rake hay. Um, but I also think that having that how retired are you gonna be kind of thing is really important because I'm guilty of it too. Here, like I've been in extension for it's 31 years. And when somebody asks me like a few years ago when I was going to retire, I said, oh, probably in 5 years. Well, at this point, that 5 years ago, I said that. Now it's been those 5 years, and now I'm saying, oh, maybe 5 years, right? So it's like that rolling horizon that does not give that successor generation the opportunity to understand when they need to be prepared financially to purchase assets or be prepared management wise to start making all those decisions. So that's a really unfair rolling horizon to give to that successor generation.
So, Darlene, I want to jump in here and see if you can maybe give us some examples of how these successionary plans have worked. In like, if you've worked with a farm in Pennsylvania that maybe reached out to PA Farm Link, or some situations where you've been able to say, like, this was a success story. We saw a handful of farms, this is what they did, and this is how it worked. Because we see a lot of these meetings or these kind of webinars or things where we give people the tools to do them, but then do they actually get implemented? And what does that look like when we kind of ground truth any of this stuff? So do you have any stories about where you've worked and how this can actually be used?
Well, yes, and really our part in it becomes, it depends on the farm family, sometimes how much communication they have with us after the fact, but we have worked with farmers, and I want to say some of them may be more, self-motivated to start the process and to work through it and so on, and to from beginning to end. And we have worked with families who we've met with a couple times, given them direction, and then they carry on from there because they are very self-motivated. They do have family members that are ready to, come back to the farm or whatever. So they see an urgency, they see a need to work on those that process themselves at the time, and they may be able to move forward on their own. And I am thinking of a farm in Eastern PA that I know has done that and has done it well. And uh, two of the next generation, I believe, are part of the farm now, and have their own enterprises and so on, and have moved that farm forward in a way that works for them. Now, other farms, of course, we've met with them for, I want to say, a longer period of time, worked through some various situations with them, Usually a lot of it is around the financials, it's around the planning. We also bring on other experts to work with them. Again, it's more like a team aspect because we work them with them on certain things and then we may direct them to the financial professional that can help them because I'm not that financial professional, move them on to another professional to help with that situation or with their farm succession planning, and then they carry them to the next level and then forward with making the decisions they need to make and setting up the plan with the next generation and watching them take over and so on. So it looks very different in different situations. There's also a farm family that I worked with that they had ideas of what they wanted to do. They don't have children of their own, but we had a lot of conversation around what their plan was gonna be with the, farm assets and how they are gonna move them forward and making decisions that they are comfortable with on how they see their farm moving forward because they definitely want the legacy of their farm to continue and how they're going to do that. But that looked very different again because they had a very specific need that we talked about and worked through. Again, it's not for me to decide what their final decision is, that's theirs, but to direct them and guide them with things they need to work through and then watch them go on and carry that out with those people and work with the people that they have in mind to carry out their plans. So those are kind of just a few examples that I can think of, kind of just hitting some of the high points of them or the very basics of some of them. But again, they do all look different. But many times our role is not the entire role, and I don't think it should be because we want to get the other ag professionals in there working with the farmers and the farm families that have expertise in the other areas, such as the financial professionals and business consultants, as well as again, the attorney comes into play too, but your accountant and the various people, and it depends on the farm. There may be a need for if there's a situation where it's a livestock farm and so on. Maybe they need a nutritionist. Maybe they need other specialists in the other areas that would come on board. So it's going to be more of a team aspect, or sometimes either working together or passing of the baton when we work with them in areas we can. And then we see, well, your next area to work on is this. We will pass the baton to those other professionals and have them move on to work with them if we're not all sitting at the table at the same time too.
And I want to reiterate, Darlene said it exactly right. Like it's not up to us to make the decisions, right? That a lot of times people will come and say, what do we want to do? What should we do? That kind of thing. But those of us who are facilitators, we're really our responsibility is to giving them a really good process to have the conversations that need to have, and then they're responsible for making the decisions that give them the outcome that they want. And the question of like we always are asked about, and not in as criticism to you guys, because you asked the question of what are some examples of how, like, what's worked. I really hesitate a lot of times to give, because a lot of times you end up talking about the business structures, right? They got an LLC, or they did this way, or they did this particular thing. And people, farms, a lot of times will maybe like latch onto those things and say, well, then we need to get an LLC, when they haven't done maybe the work that they needed to do about talking about what it is that they want to actually have happen. So I always hesitate a little bit about saying like examples of farms that have worked, because they are so unique to the situation that they have. We don't know what the debt load is. We don't know about like what the off-farm siblings have graciously said they don't want anything, compared to some that they do want some sort of division of the asset. So there's all kinds of things that come into play. But if you can have a really good process where you've talked through those things, then the decision that those farms families make as a result of those conversations, they can feel so much more confident about that they've talked through them. And as Darlene had said at the beginning of the hour, is like, they're not perfect. Don't wait for the perfect plan, right? Because you're going to make mistakes, but you try to do your best and get it done. So that's the thing, is that they're not going to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's just such a unique topic in that every situation, every farm looks so completely different, right? I think you mentioned earlier, even the difference between I have 7 kids or I have 4 kids, right? Makes a huge difference. And not every family is starting at the same point, right? Not every, and maybe it's outside of the family. Maybe you have someone else, right? It's just so unique. So even giving those case studies might direct someone to follow the wrong pathway for their unique situation. I think that's an important point there, and I think that that workbook is going to be an incredible resource. I mean, I've been scrolling around. Justin has. That's a great place to start, and it gives you some pages that you might want to put up on the fridge to follow. Right? Okay, so
Yep.
we have this covered. What's next? What's next? Now, maybe so. I think we're gonna wrap up here soon, and maybe we can quickly talk about what maybe some of the most common tensions points are in this process. And then I'll give you guys an opportunity to talk about your new publication, and then we'll probably close out here. All right.
Yeah.
So tensions, go ahead.
Yeah. I will go over them quickly. I could talk about them forever because this is this is sort of the crux of the conversations that we have. But one of them is, and Justin, I think you mentioned it too, about like that whole idea of letting go versus retaining control of the decision making, right? And I will say, let me quickly say, this is based out of some research from Pennsylvania. So I will give Justin and Ryan the link to that particular research if anybody wants to dive into that. Fair versus equal, that's that inheritance piece. Like, what's fair to divide, what's equal, like there's fair is not always an equal division. Profit versus affordability, this whole idea of like, you guys are in, and Wisconsin has it too, the sometimes the development areas that are high in development, the price of land is astronomical. For us, it's just other farmers seeing land availability and paying a lot for land. So the idea of, do I sell it for the highest profit, or do I make it affordable for that next generation? Lots of different conversations around that. This one, I think, is something that we can all work on and be helpful with, is helping those farms have actual conversations rather than relying on the assumptions of it's going to be the oldest son that takes over the farm, or it's going to be a completely equal division of the assets for all the children. So really having conversations instead of relying on assumptions. And then this one piece I'll talk a little bit more about because it's a key thing, is that progress versus continuity. So a lot of times, and I'm sure people have heard this, well, we've always done it this way, right? Like that's that continuity piece. We've always done it this way. But you've got a young person that's coming in and wants to make their mark on that business. So they want to see like if their decisions are going to move that farm forward. So that's sort of that progress part of it. So maybe they want to, and I always use this example. I worked with a farm. It was like those heifers always are in that pen, no changes, right? But if we could like step away from that, we've always done it with this way at that micro level, and maybe think about that continuity being that it stays in the family or it stays as a farm business, thinking about continuity at a higher level than the day-to-day things, because you're gonna, let's think about it as there's going to have to be crop progress that happens so that it does stay within the family and it does stay a farm. So there are going to need to be changes. So just having that conversation of what does continuity and progress mean to those farm families. So that's a high level conversation about the tensions that particular research article talks about.
So I think you can summarize those, like, I'm thinking about those with my family. But I'm also thinking about those with like on this, you said micro scale, but like the micro scale of just my life, right? Within my household on moving something across the house or equity versus equality and like all of this. And so like it's human nature to have these five tensions and these five
Yeah.
struggles with like every interaction we have. And so now that we think about like blowing them out to this bigger scale of more involved people and more assets and more higher stakes, I guess to say, like
Yeah.
there is no reason to expect that these things wouldn't come right to the forefront.
Right. Yeah.
Because these are kind of the drivers of emotional tensions in everything that we do every day.
Yeah, exactly. I like that way you said that. And that's why I bring it up in almost every presentation I do. I try to work in this conversation about these tensions because I want to make it, I want people to understand that they're not unique, right? You're in the company of lots of great people that are struggling with some of these as well. So let's not make it sound like a stigma that you're having a little bit of struggle about something, and let's just say, hey, it's a tension. Let's talk about how we can address it.
So I think that this has been a very good conversation. I have learned a tremendous amount. I think that maybe I've got some homework and some research now I need to do, and hopefully this encourages a lot of us to do this. But I want to start with you, Darlene. For someone in the state, we've talked about the record, we talked about the book, the planning, PA farm length. Where would what would we kind of give to our folks as resources if I'm at a farm visit and they ask, where should we kind of direct people locally that's a great opportunity for them to learn more about this?
Sure. Um, you can direct them to our resource hub, which has this workbook on, and also has the new workbook on that publication that Joy and I just finished. And but other than that, too, there are events coming up. There's workshops that will be listed and that sort of thing, whether they're through PA FarmLink or through Extension or Farm Credit or any of the other organizations. There's often programs coming up and webinars and workshops available throughout the winter meeting season, especially. So those would be some areas I would direct people to first. But to get your feet wet, I do think going to the resources on someone like our website at PA FarmLink, there's webinar recordings there and other things too from past programs. And there's resources and links to other programs such as University of Wisconsin and others. I think those are good starting points. Again, I've had people who were able to listen to the recorded webinars and then share them with family members to get the conversation started. So, you can utilize those resources. A younger generation or either generation can utilize those resources to potentially move the conversation ahead at home, within their farm surroundings. And it's a good starting point.
Great. Yeah, it often takes one person in the family to really take a hold of those resources, get them to the rest of them, and just have to get them on board, right?
Yes.
So I think so PA Farm Link will make sure that we get that hub linked to our notes because it will be a wonderful place with a lot of your resources. Now, you did mention that you have a new publication coming out with Joy. Does one of you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, we'll talk. So we called it the companion piece to the workbook. So it is really designed. We tried to find either we wrote articles or we found other colleagues in other states to help us write well, chapters. I guess we're calling them chapters. And to speak to and maybe build out a little bit of what you want to talk about or things that you might run into as you're working on different worksheets. So the publication has these chapters, and then at the end of each chapter, it directs you to which worksheet this maybe speaks to, or you might want to work on after you've read that chapter, and also gives you a place to a few reflection questions even within the publication itself. So that you can maybe write some things about what you're maybe feeling about your own farm after reading that chapter. And I'm going to say that I don't even remember the title of our publication at this particular moment. So, but we'll have that. Darlene's going to have that up on her website, and you'll be able to access that. And so yeah, we'll be able to get that. Darlene, do you remember it?
There we go. Well, it'll be up on the hub. So
Yes.
there you go. The FarmLink hub. That's where you can find it. All right, great. Well, I think I've learned a lot. Justin, I think we need to create a new segment here. What term did Justin learn? He really likes learning terms on every new episode. Justin, what did you learn? Did you learn a term today?
So maybe I didn't learn a term, but I feel like I really have kind of put a point on this farm succession planning, right? I feel when I go out now, I can understand this better. I have a better ability to go out and communicate with my producers that are wanting to have this conversation. And I feel like I can wrap my head around it now better. So overall, I feel much more comfortable with this conversation than I did an hour and a half ago. So I think I've won the lottery on that.
I agree with that, and I think now we have a lot of incredible resources that I can provide to some of these families or make them aware of. That workbook is just seems really awesome to direct them to if they're in their process. And a lot of the farmers that I'm working with are somewhere in that process. I think if you're a farm, you're somewhere in that process, right? All right, well, I think we can close that out here. Joy, Darlene, thank you so much for coming on. We really enjoyed this one. So for our listeners, we'll see you on another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast.